directly to Carol. So either way, and if you want to know more, you can ask me questions after class, or you can go look for your August 29th email from Drake. And now it is my distinct pleasure to turn the podium over to Bruce Miller, who we are happy to have back with us this year for 5 classes starting today. As lots of you know already, but for those of you who don't, Bruce has been a key figure in the theater in Richmond for more than 40 years. He is the founding artistic director of Virginia Rep and a longtime friend of our church. He enjoys teaching and speaking on faith-based topics. And this year, he's going to talk to us about lesser known women who are foundational in Judeo-Christianity. Thank you so much, Bruce, and take it away.
Good morning. It is so nice to see so many of you. It is, I think, maybe exactly 25 or a little bit over even that are assembled here. Plus, there are probably another 20 of you on Zoom. I guess I should look at the owl. I'll look at the owl and I'll look at people in the room. This is my first time using this technology, and so I am finding my way here. Let's begin, if we can, with a prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us together through technology, through person-to-person fellowship. Thank you for giving this opportunity to discuss your word, the history of early Christianity, and help us to discern what you would have us understand from these sources. Be in our hearts, be in our minds. Help to bring us together as one as we seek to do your will in the world. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. So I'm coming to you today on a wing and a prayer. I got up at 4 in the morning, as I usually do on the mornings when I teach, and thought, well, I'll pull everything together this morning. I had done all the other stuff in advance. And
I'm hearing myself on feedback.
anyway, as
I'm doing it, the computer broke down.
so I have some pencil writings on
My
my
notes, and I have some
printed notes from
previous.
meetings. Okay, we'll see if,
No, that was me.
is that
I
you?
had to mute myself.
Oh, okay, all right,
But that
good.
was creating the feedback. I'm
Now
sorry.
I won't hear the echo, so that's a good thing. Like I say, I'm new to this technology. Anyway, I'm really happy to be here this morning and excited to be launching this new series. For those of you who have been in one of my classes before, you know that I always begin with a disclaimer. And that is to say that whereas some people, and I always think of John Trotty because I used to attend the class when he was a teacher, some people teach from a place of knowledge and surety. That is not me. I teach from a place of questions. The reason that I love teaching Sunday school, and I do love teaching Sunday school, is that it gives me the opportunity to learn along with each of you about things that interest me. As you read, if you read the blurb for this series, and I will read it now, here's what I intend to be talking about. Lesser known women who are foundational in Judeo-Christianity. Now, Judeo-Christianity is sort of a new word for me. It may be a new word for you because it basically combines Judaism and Christianity into one faith practice. It says, let's overlook for a moment whether Jesus is the divine Messiah or whether he is not the divine Messiah, because everything else that unites Judaism and Christianity is the same, and it's a part of Judeo-Christianity. The reason that this term and this practice has become important to me in the last few years is that I found out through Ancestry.com about my Jewish ancestry, which I had not previously known. And I am embracing that and excited by that. The blurb that I wrote goes as follows. Let's be honest. When it comes to women, the Bible delivers an unfortunate bounty of mixed messages. During this 5-week session, we'll revisit several of the phenomenal women whose lives make it perfectly clear that whoever wrote 1 Timothy 11:12, saying, a woman should learn in quietness and full submission. I do not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man. She must be quiet. That individual who wrote that was speaking, I believe, with forked tongue. I don't think that that is a true statement. Now, some people attribute that sense is coming from 1 Timothy to the Apostle Paul. Most scholars today do not believe that Paul actually wrote those words. And if you look elsewhere in Paul, you can find countless examples of Paul saying that women are vitally important to the church in the early days of Christianity. My point in putting this series together is not so much to address the gender issues as it is to address the issues of some of Christ's family being told, shut up, we don't want to hear from you. And that drives me crazy. So I'm going to be talking about specific women. Today, we're going to talk about Dorcas and her sisters, specifically Lydia and Phoebe. We'll next week talk about Shiphrah and Puah. In week 3 on October 3rd, we'll talk about Abigail. And on October 10th, Athaliah and Jehoshaphat. And on October 17th, Huldah and Anna. As I was researching which women I wanted to talk about, I looked up lesser known women in the Bible. I Googled it, and about 20 names appeared. So I read the stories of all of them, and these were the ones who jumped out at me as being women I wanted to know more about. Otherwise, I was going, Dorcas. Who the heck is Dorcas? I don't know who Dorcas is. And so this gave me the opportunity to do that research, and I will share that with you. Now, why did I become interested in this? Specifically for several reasons, and I'll talk about what I was doing yesterday for a starter. Yesterday, I had the privilege of delivering one of the eulogies at the life celebration service for Martha Norris Gilbert. This is the program from her service. Now, most of you probably don't know who Martha Gilbert was, but I'm going to talk about her for a moment. She was most well known as being the person that Governor Chuck Robb recruited from New York, the early childhood educator he recruited from New York, a native Virginian that he recruited to come back and be the executive director of the Virginia Department for Children in the 80s. The Virginia Department for Children was a brand new agency, and what Governor Robb was trying to do was saying, let's focus all of the different activities that we do for children, and let's combine them under one department so we make sure that everybody's talking to each other. So that's what Martha Norris Gilbert is famous for. She passed away at age 82 in December of last year, but her memorial service was yesterday. What Martha Norris Gilbert is famous for, to me, is being on the board of Theater 4, one of the precursors to Virginia Repertory Theater, and being the first African-American board chairman, not just of Theater 4, but of any nonprofit arts organization, major nonprofit arts organization in the Commonwealth of Virginia. in all of history, she was the first African-American who was elected and who said yes, and who stepped forward and led our organization for 2 years. Now, this is vitally important to me because I was there and I remember what it was like to convince the board, and then more difficultly, convince Martha that this was a leadership opportunity that should take place. At the time, the model was what the model still is today for most Virginia arts organizations. The board is led by almost always a white male who has easy access to major donors. That's kind of what everyone does. Prior to Martha, it was what everyone in Virginia had always done. But we got to know Martha, I got to know Martha when I was developing Hugs and Kisses, which was Virginia's first child sexual abuse prevention early intervention program, developed in 1983. And because we were very careful in the year and a half we were developing the program, we wanted to involve experts in child development, in education, and child psychology. And so we invited Martha to be part of that team, and she said yes. When we asked her, she said, "I'm not a theater person. Why are you involving me at all?" And we said, "Your opinion, your knowledge base, your skill set is really, really important to us, and we need that contribution from you." And so she said yes. And over the ensuing years, she not only joined our board in 1990, but she helped us with the development of Runners, which was our runaway and delinquency prevention program, with Walking the Line, which Connie Gottwald worked on. And Martha also was involved in that, which is alcohol and other drug abuse prevention, and with Dancing in the Dark, which is adolescent pregnancy prevention and sexual responsibility on the male side. And by the end of working on those shows, Martha decided that she was a theater person after all. So she joined the board because she believed in what theater could do to address these vital issues that affected so many children. And she was right. Over the years, 38 years now, Hugs and Kisses has been seen by over 2 million Virginia children in every school district in the Commonwealth. And for 99% of them, it has been a prevention program that keeps child abuse out of their futures. And for about 1%, it has been an early intervention program, because about 20,000 Virginia children have come forward to disclose their personal victimization for the first time after seeing a play. So this woman, Martha Norris Gilbert, is near and dear to my heart, made a huge contribution, and her work in the arts is now all but forgotten. We held a dimming of the lights at our theater for Martha Norris Gilbert because she was the first African-American board president. And we hear all the time and respond positively all the time to lots of new young voices in the African-American community saying, this is what you need to do. This is how you need to change. And we respect that input, and we want that input, and we welcome it, and we respond to it. And not a single one of them showed up for Martha Norris Gilbert's dimming of the lights ceremony. So here again, it's a voice that was important in the history of our theater and the history of the arts, and it's a voice that tends to be forgotten. I could go on and talk about 20 other similar experiences I have had about people who are basically told, your voice doesn't matter anymore. Let's move on to something new. The one that I want to talk about, and this is because this was so popular last time I taught here, is Phyllis Galante, who so many of us knew and loved. I told the story about going to Phyllis's service at Arlington National Cemetery. And prior to that, when she was alive, very much alive, and on the board of Virginia Rep, she'd had many conversations with me about the psalm that is quoted in the musical Godspell, where they say, on the river there, we hung up our lyres, for our captors there required of us songs for our tormentors' mirth. Saying, sing us one of the songs of Zion, sing us one of the songs of Zion. But how can you sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? Phyllis's view of that song was to say, we should not hang up our harps. We should not silence our voices. We should not listen to anyone who says, your time is done. It's time for you to shut up and go home. And at the service, this branch fell from a tree, and I picked it up and I've kept it over my bulletin board ever since. And this to me is the harp that Phyllis Galani kept telling me, don't hang up your harp. You've got to keep playing, you've got to keep talking, all of our voices, hers, mine, each of yours is important and needs to be valued and heard. So that's why the voices of these women in the Bible are important to me. And here is my thesis statement. I think that what happened is that Jesus and Christianity and the early Jesus movement had one major point to make, and that is all of us are equal in the eyes of God. All of us are the same in our ability to work for each other, with each other, on behalf of each other, and to provide positive benefit in the world. The women we're going to look at first in the New Testament and then going back to the Old Testament say, their lives say without a doubt that these women were pivotal in their day and time, and yet we have tended to forget about them because it is so easy to erase people that are important and to silence voices as if they no longer matter. Specifically, we are told by many scholars, including the two women that we're about to see on video, that Jesus's message is that women are vitally important, that Paul's message was women are vitally important. But over the next few centuries, the Roman Caesars said, you know, we're going to masculinize religious practice. And so the women fell further and further from front and center of our theology. And I think that does great disservice to them and to us because we pay less attention to their voices. The woman you're about to hear from is named Helen Bond. She is a historian. She's speaking at St. Paul's Cathedral in London, one of my favorite places in the world. And she's going to talk about Jesus's female disciples. So Hannah, can you cue that up and start it? Let's see if we can make technology our friend.
Participation of women in the earliest Christian congregations. We're going to chart things from the time of Jesus and Paul, where women seem to be relatively prominent in the Christian community, to later times when women's activities seem to be much more restricted. So we're going to speak in blocks of 10 minutes each, or at least we're going to try to keep ourselves to 10 minutes. And I want to start off by saying a few things about women in the Jesus movement. It's really important, first of all, though, to get a sense of the first century context. These are, of course, patriarchal times, when power and privilege was in the hands of men. Most importantly, of course, elite men. But in every town and village throughout the Roman Empire, from local elites down to the smallest family unit, it was the men who made the decisions on behalf of their dependents. Women's roles were much more restricted, frequently confined to domestic space and child rearing, and unchaperoned interaction with men who weren't family members would have been frowned upon. In rural areas and amongst poorer folks, it might not always have been possible to keep to clearly defined gender roles. Poverty does have a knack of bringing people together. But even here, old habits died hard, and there was always a sense of the gendered nature of human life. What things were right and proper for women to do, and a strong sense of censorship if women dared to overstep the mark. So this is the world into which Jesus was born. It was a world that noticed the actions of men, but not those of women. And of course, it was a world that would remember the names of Jesus' brothers, but not his sisters. It's just as important to be clear about the nature of the Gospels. They are first and foremost, of course, documents of faith, written to strengthen people's allegiance to Jesus, to declare him as God's anointed one, the Christ, even God's unique Son. What they were never intended to be is a social history of earliest Christianity. They're not interested in recording who followed him and why, or documenting what drew some people to follow Jesus and not others. It's people in the modern world who want to know this kind of question. But for the most part, they're not going to find the answers to those things in the New Testament. And this applies all the more to Jesus' female followers. The story that the evangelists tell is obviously focused on Jesus himself. While indoor domestic space is sometimes described, the bulk of what was recorded belongs to the outside male space and relates to Jesus' actions with prominent men, particularly leaders like the Pharisees or the chief priests, the Roman governor later on, and of course the male disciples. So the emphasis is on Jesus, what he says and does, and what other men make of him. How then can we say anything at all about the place of women in the Jesus movement? The trick, I think, is to pay attention to tiny clues in the text. Places where memories of women's participation have survived despite the patriarchal culture. And sometimes despite the intentions of the evangelists. Sometimes these little clues just somehow get through. And we'll also need to use a certain amount of imagination. This is always the case with ancient history, but all the more so when we're trying to understand how women fitted into things. So our knowledge is full of gaps. Our task as historians is to try to fill them in as plausible a way as possible.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. Now, we're going to hear a little more from her in a minute, and I'll tell you right now, we're going to run over today, but I'm not going to run over because I have to release Hannah at exactly 9:45 because she has to get ready for the next service. And so I'm going to stick to our timeline here. But the point is that, as she said, we believe, modern scholarship believes that women were more important than we are led to believe that they are today in Jesus's early teachings. I want to look at Luke chapter 8 that reads as follows. After this, Jesus traveled about from one town and village to another, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God. The 12 were with him, and also some women who had been cured of evil spirits and diseases. In this case, just like as she mentioned, when they talk about Jesus's brothers and sisters, they name the brothers in the Bible. They don't name the sisters. They just say the sisters. Here we're saying there were some men, the disciples were with them, and some women. But then they do name some of them. Also some women who had been cured of evil spirits and diseases. Mary, called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had come out. Joanna, the wife of Chuza, the manager of Herod's household. Susanna, and many others. These women were helping to support them out of their own resources. Now we kind of overlook that line, but here we have the disciples, 12 male disciples that we all know, although if I asked you to name them, you would have difficulty doing it because they have different names in different books of the Bible. But we have the 12 male disciples, and then we have these women who were helping to support them out of their own resources. So just like in All the President's Men, when they say follow the money, when we're looking at the Bible, we need to follow the money here. Who is paying for Jesus's early ministry? Well, it turns out it's Mary, called Magdalene. Now, Mary Magdalene, poor Mary Magdalene, is an amazing disciple and woman in the Bible. Centuries later, not in the Bible, centuries later, people began to speculate that maybe she was a prostitute. And in popular culture, Jesus Christ Superstar and several different novels and films, she is the wife of Jesus or the mistress of Jesus or the lover of Jesus. None of that is in the Bible. What is in the Bible is that she is Mary, called Magdalene. Magdalene means tower. It's kind of like saying Peter is the rock. Mary is the Magdalene. She is the tower in Jesus's early ministry. She is the one who the Bible tells us Jesus came and spoke to in person, the first one after his crucifixion and resurrection. She was among the women who, when all of the male disciples disappeared and fled after Jesus's arrest, she was there at the cross with the other women to acknowledge their relationship with Jesus and to be there in his final hours. Now, these are things we kind of overlook. Who paid for the ministry? These women did. Why is Mary called Magdalene? Because she was Mary the tower. And who did Jesus appear to after his resurrection? It was to Mary the tower. Then if you look at a passage in, here we go, Mark chapter 15, verse 40 and 41. Some women were watching from a distance. Among them were Mary, called Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James the Younger and of Joseph, and Salome, which I'm told not to pronounce Salome, which is what I would ordinarily do. In Galilee, these women had followed him and cared for his needs. Many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem were also there. Now, when we talk about the 12 disciples, we are told by scholars that the reason there are 12, because we get lots of different names in different books. The reason there were 12, because there were 12 tribes of ancient Israel. So the symmetry of Jesus having 12 male disciples matches the 12 tribes of Israel, which of course were based on the 12 brothers of Joseph. But when Jesus sends the disciples out to minister to his people, he sends them, the Bible tells us, 2 by 2. Now that term 2 by 2, I always went, oh, well, it's James and John's, and it's, these 2 guys, these 2 guys, these 2 guys, and these 2 guys. But when you look back, I am told by people that know much more than I do, at the ancient Hebrew and the ancient Greek, 2 by 2 means exactly what it means in the story of Noah and the flood. It means a male and a female. That is part of the exact meaning of the phrase 2 by 2. And it makes sense because he was sending his disciples into a patriarchal society where they were to minister to his people, and men could not minister to women. If his women followers wanted to be baptized, a man couldn't touch them. That was absolutely taboo in this patriarchal society. If they wanted to be healed of demons, they talk about Mary the Magdalene being healed from 7 or 9, I can't remember, demons. What that basically meant, or when they got rid of demons, they were healing. That was the act of healing. The way we think the diseases are caused by germs and viruses. In biblical times, germs or diseases were caused by demons. So when a disciple expelled demons, it was basically a healing process. And it often involved the laying on of hands. And a man in this patriarchal society could not lay his hands on a woman who was not his wife. So when Jesus sent the disciples out 2 by 2, all these women we read about in Galilee, these women had followed him and cared for his needs. Many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem were also there. When we read about this, perhaps, dare I say likely, these were among those who were sent out 2 by 2 to minister to the early Christian church. Now let's look at Dorcas. That's the only one we're going to have a chance to get to today, and we're going to have to be very quick about it. In Acts, if I were to say to you, there is only one woman in the entire New Testament who is referred to with the word mathetria, the Greek word meaning woman disciple. Wouldn't you expect to know who that woman was? If I were to say to you, in the entire Bible, there is only one adult woman who is resurrected from the dead, wouldn't you expect to know the name of the woman to whom I was referring? Well, she has 2 names. Her Hebrew name is Tabitha, and her Greek name is Dorcas. And she was the first person to be resurrected from the dead after Jesus's death by one of his disciples. So God made a choice here. It's similar to, I love talking about the Ethiopian eunuch. It's similar to when God said, who am I going to send? Stephen or Philip? Well, anyway, one of them. Who am I going to send to for the first conversion? Who am I going to send them to? He said, I know. I'll send not someone from the usual suspects. he sent them to convert the Ethiopian eunuch who reported to the woman, Candace. So it was a black castrated male who never in a million years would have been allowed in the temple. The Ethiopian eunuch, we're told, went to the temple, couldn't get in. So he's riding back in his carriage to his mistress, or his leader, to whom he reported, Candace, which is actually her title rather than her name. And he's reading Isaiah and he doesn't understand it. And so the disciple stops him and converts him and baptizes him right then and there. Who is the first person resurrected from the dead? I'm reading from Acts. I got 1 minute, 9:36. In Joppa, there was a disciple named Tabitha, which when translated is Dorcas, who was always doing good and helping the poor. About that time, she became sick and died, and her body was washed and placed in an upstairs room. Lydda was near Joppa. So when the disciples heard that Peter was in Lydda, they sent 2 men to him and urged him, please come at once. Peter went with them, and when he arrived, he was taken upstairs to the room. All the widows stood around him, crying and showing him the robes and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was still with them. Peter sent them all out of the room. Then he got down on his knees and he prayed. Turning toward the dead woman, he said, Tabitha, get up. She opened her eyes, and seeing Peter, she sat up. He took her by the hand and helped her to her feet. Then he called the believers and the widows and presented her to them alive. This became known all over Joppa, and many people believed in the Lord. Who did God select to be the first resurrected from the dead? A woman. The only woman in the Bible referred to by the word mathetria, the Greek word meaning woman disciple. Next week, we're going to talk about 2 other firsts, Lydia and Phoebe. And we're going to try and say that in this early church, women played a vital role, more than we realize. And we're going to talk about how that is interpreted today, particularly in the evangelical movement, as the appropriate role for women in today's current religious practice. So that's it. My time is up. Thank you for being with us. Try to get more attuned to looking at you and looking at the penguin down here, the owl, whatever it is. But I'm delighted you all are here. I look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks very much. God bless you. Bye.